Armin. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hello. I hope you stick around. It's raining outside, so I'm sorry if there's like background noise, but hopefully I talk loud enough to talk over the rain. I've literally wanted it to rain for weeks and it didn't rain until the one day I decided to film, but that's fine. So today I wanted to film a little video talking about some of my most disappointing reads of this year so far. Now, I'm not saying that these books sucked. Some of them, yes. But some of them are just like, I went into them with really high expectations and they just didn't quite reach those expectations, and that made me sad. So I put them on this list because... So the first book on this list is Made by Stephanie Land, and at first I was hesitant to put this book on the list because it's a memoir and I don't like criticizing people's life stories, I guess, but then I decided just looking at it as a book, like objectively looking at it from a book perspective, it was just so boring. Like, it's not even that long, but it was still too long. I got about halfway through this and almost stopped reading it, and if I hadn't been doing a readathon as like my first filmed series on my channel, I would have stopped reading it. But I didn't, and I'm kind of sad that I wasted my time with it because honestly I got nothing out of it whatsoever. So basically, Maid is a memoir, as I said, by Stephanie Land, and it talks about her time working as a maid while she tries to provide for her daughter as a single mother and get to college to become a writer. Spoiler alert, she gets to college and she becomes a writer with her best-selling memoir. This book was book of the month, I think, last year for one of the months, and I saw it on the list and I was like, okay, and I found it on Thrift Books for pretty cheap, so I got it. And let me just say, there are only so many ways you can describe cleaning a bathroom before it just becomes repetitive, and there are only so many times you need to describe this one activity to get your point across, and that happened about halfway through, and then I was like, okay, can we talk about something else, like what you're learning from this, or your growth as a character, or like looking back on this, what have you learned, other than these same like 2 points that kept being repeated, and it just like didn't happen. And honestly, by the end of the book I was just like, okay, like, I'm happy for you, I'm happy you got what you wanted, but it didn't have to be this long. Also, there were a few things about the actual content of this book. Like I said, I wasn't gonna criticize, but now that I'm thinking on it, like, going through people's things as a coping mechanism for having to deal with the difficulty of like cleaning their houses, like, yes, I understand on some level, but there's a line and like, she crossed it. Like, you don't go through somebody's loved one's ashes more than once. Like, the first time, like, she opens the urn and she's like, oh cool, ashes, and then she goes back and does it again, and I'm like, okay, after the first time that you found out that there were ashes in that container, you should not have touched it again. Like, they didn't ask you to clean the urn, they didn't ask you to touch the urn, they expected that you would not touch their belongings in that way, and it just kind of bothered me that she did that, and I'm just like, yeah, maybe not. So I don't think I would really recommend this book. I know that in my Owls Readathon video where I was reading this book, I said like I might recommend it and I gave it 3 stars, I think, at that time. But I think that was just because I was new to BookTube and I was hesitant to give anything really bad reviews. But I'm saying now I probably wouldn't recommend this book just because like it didn't give me anything and it was kind of a waste of my time. So if you still want to read it, go for it. So the second book on this list is Children of Blood and Bone, and before I get started, I'm not criticizing the representation in this book. The representation was great. I'm so happy that there is a best-selling YA fantasy with all Black characters for Black kids to see themselves in this book. That's great. Like, I'm so happy that this is a bestseller for that reason, but as a YA fantasy, I just didn't like this book. So Children of Blood and Bone is a YA fantasy inspired by African mythology, where a group of characters is trying to basically bring back magic to the world, and it's kind of a commentary on racism and police brutality in America and like all that stuff, I guess. And I guess it'd be especially relevant with the Black Lives Matter protests that are going on right now and all that kind of stuff, so for that reason, I think it would be a good book to read if you're into YA fantasy. But for me, I found the characters just like slightly too unlikable. Like, they were very immature at some points and they just kept making like the worst possible decisions and everything they did would just backfire. And for me, like, I want my characters, yes, to make mistakes. Obviously, they have to be relatable and real people do make mistakes a lot, but they don't make mistakes literally every step of the way, learn nothing from that, and then continue to make the same mistakes over and over again. And it was just really frustrating to read. Also, the male love interest in this is just so indecisive, and I understand indecisiveness. Like, I am a very indecisive person, but this book is like multi-POV, and so it switches back and forth between the characters, and he has his perspectives in this book, and every time you come back to a chapter that is his perspective, it's like he's changed his mind about something major, and I'm just like, okay, you can't literally go through these large changes every time we come back to you, because not much time has passed between your first chapter and your second chapter, and you've already gone through like a life change. And I'm just like, okay, nothing has happened to bring this change about. You just literally changed your mind. I'm like, make up your mind. He's just way too inconsistent. Also, if I had to hear him describe Zelly's soul as sea salt scented one more time, I was gonna throw this book, which I'm glad I didn't, because this is a borrowed book, but it was just so frustrating. And so for that reason, I put it on this list. Also, I went into this with really high expectations since it is like an instant bestseller, and I had only heard like really good things about it, but after reading it, I'm just like, And since then, I have read some reviews that said kind of the same things that I was thinking, so I'm glad I'm not the only one, but also I'm glad that it did well, obviously, because, like, it's good representation. It's just not my cup of tea. The third book on this list is Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng, and this is a very sprawling story, I suppose, about a custody battle between a rich white suburban family and the girl's birth mother, who is a poor Asian immigrant. That's like the plot, but the reason I didn't like this book is that there were literally so many subplots with so much potential that just didn't get touched on, and even the main plot was like very tangentially touched on. It was like at the very end of the book. Like, this book was 75% just like white suburb and 25% plot, and I wish that the last quarter of the book had been more of the book, because it was just so slow. I almost stopped reading it, but I kept reading it because of the good reviews. I was like, maybe it gets better, and it did, sort of. Like, it got better a little bit, but mainly this was like, there's so many subplots, and we're not going to talk about any of them because we're just going to focus on this one character who's so mysterious and so interesting, and how everybody revolves around her and how she touches on everybody's lives. I don't know, I felt like there was so much more that could have happened, and it just didn't, and it was like really slow, and really, a lot of it was just building up to this like finale, and then the finale kind of fell short for me, and it was just like, okay. And also the writing, it was very kind of aloof. It felt like I wasn't really living anything. It was just kind of telling me about it after the fact, and I didn't really like that. It was just basically a bunch of people making really bad decisions very slowly. So the next book on this list is We Hunt the Flame, which is a YA fantasy inspired by Arabia, and it has an enemies to lover romance, and I was really sad that I had to put it on this list because I really wanted to love it, and I'm probably gonna give it another try at some point in the future because I do want to read it eventually. I've heard only good things about it, and I really want to like it. I just could not get into it. Like, there was just too much description at the beginning, and like not for the things I wanted described. It's like everything else was being described except for the parts that I didn't understand, and I had to keep like going back and rereading scenes over and over again to figure out like what was happening in my head, and it just wasn't working for me. And also, like, I couldn't get into the story or the characters. It just like wasn't doing it for me, and I was pretty sad about that because it's like POC characters and a YA fantasy. Like, that's what I wanted, and I just couldn't do it. But that's not to say that it's a bad book. I'm sure it's a great book. I just couldn't get into it. So I'm not gonna judge it without reading it all the way through. So I did have a review up for it, but then I ended up taking it down, like star-wise review. I ended up not giving it any stars because I don't want to give it 1 star and be like, oh, I didn't even finish the book. Like, I didn't even get past 100 pages, because like, I know sometimes it's a slow start and then it gets better. And if I could finish Maid and Little Fires Everywhere, like, I should give this a shot, but not right now. So the next book on this list is Chain of Gold. Let me preface this. I really liked this book. It's not a bad book, not by any means. Like, I didn't hate this book. I wasn't bored by this book. It just had very high expectations to live up to, and it just didn't do it for me. So if you don't know, Chain of Gold is the sequel to the Infernal Devices trilogy. The Infernal Devices is one of my favorite series, like, ever, of all time. I love the Infernal Devices. I love the characters. Like, they have my whole heart. And this follows their kids, and I really wanted to love this because the Infernal Devices, every time I read it, it just leaves me sobbing on the floor. And this one just didn't. Like, I just didn't feel anything for any of the characters except for Grace Blackthorne, and that was only because I hated her with my entire being. So it did make me feel something. It just didn't make me feel enough. Like, I just wanted more out of this book, and it just didn't give it to me. So hopefully when Chain of Iron comes out, I'll reread this in a different mindset, and I will love this book a little bit more. And Chain of Iron will maybe make me more attached to the characters because I really want to like this. Like, the cover is beautiful, the writing was really good, the pacing was great, like, I loved it, but like, I didn't love it enough. So one thing I didn't like though is Cordelia is a Persian character, and I was just bothered by the fact that her one like characteristic that people love about her is like the one Western characteristic she has. So like, she has like really red hair, like she's ginger, and I'm sure that some Persians do have red hair, but like, I hate that in a lot of YA fantasies, or even just books in general, like the one POC character, or like the few POC characters, they always have this one characteristic that is considered beautiful by Western beauty standards, and I'm just like, why can't they just have black or brown hair? Like, why can't that be the beautiful thing? Or like, why can't they just have brown eyes? Like, are brown eyes not enough? Like, do they have to have purple eyes or silver eyes or like something, you know? Like, why can't they just be the POC, and why can't their characteristics, like the normal characteristics that a POC reader would relate to, like why can't that be considered beautiful? Like, why does it have to be something Western? I don't know. Also, her name is Cordelia, and like I've heard some explanations on like why her name is Cordelia. Like in this time period, maybe they like didn't want to give her a Persian name because it's like make it easier on her for like not facing racism and stuff. But like, this is literally the Shadowhunter world. Like, what follows normal rules in this world? Like, she could have had a Persian name and not faced like that much racism as she would have in the real world. Like, obviously she's brown, so she's already gonna face racism. Like, you didn't have to not name her something Persian. Like, I get that her nickname is Layla and like that's like a Persian name, but why does her name have to be Cordelia? Why can't it be a brown name? I don't know. Why does her brother have a Western name too? Like, his name is Alistair. He could have had a brown name too. I don't know. It just bothers me because I'm like, you had one chance to make us relate, and it didn't work. So that's why Chain of Gold is on this list. And the last book on this list, I'm sure you're not surprised, is Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Again, I didn't hate this book. Some people really hated this book, and I didn't hate it. So the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is the prequel to the Hunger Games trilogy, and it follows President Snow as a child, as an 18-year-old. Growing up to be his evil little self. I'm not gonna lie, to be honest, I wanted a Mags book, but we didn't get a Mags book. We got Snow and a lot of political and sociological commentary. I'm not complaining. It was a good commentary. I really enjoyed it. It was a lot to think about. But I think that most of what I liked about this book was actually just the references to the original Hunger Games trilogy, because the new content was really just like a day in the life of Coriolanus Snow. Here he goes again, washing dishes. Like, it was the pacing. What was the pacing? Like, literally, it was like a very slow vlog. Also, the ending was like, what? Like, how did you get from point A to point B? I don't understand. I'm not really sure what's going on. It's like you kind of had something going, but you needed to get rid of these characters, so you just kind of like went, hey, bye. Like, I don't know. To those who have read it, you'll understand what I mean. If you haven't, no spoilers, but it wasn't terrible. It just wasn't as amazing as the original, and I think for that reason I put it on this list, because I was a little bit disappointed in how it didn't fulfill my very high expectations. So that's why it's on this list. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Let me know down below what you actually thought of some of these books. Like, did you love them? Did you hate them? Were you somewhere in between? Like, what did you think? And as always, don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more of my videos, because I will be posting new content very soon. Thank you guys for watching. Bye bye.